The snow was already falling outside my kitchen window when my son called to tell me he'd booked the trip. "Dad, you've been working that garden until your knees give out every single evening," he said. "You need to actually rest. Real rest. Not just sitting on the porch watching the birds." I laughed. I told him he worried too much. He was 34 years old and still talked to me like I might break if I sneezed too hard. I loved him for it, honestly. After his mother passed 4 years ago, we'd gotten closer in the way that grief sometimes does to people. Strips away the small distances you'd let build up over the years without noticing. "I booked you a cabin in the Smokies," he said. "Gatlinburg area. 5 nights. Just you, the mountains, some hiking trails if you feel up to it. The place has a hot tub on the back deck." I told him it sounded perfect, and I meant it. I should have paid closer attention to what came next. He said his wife, I'll call her by what she was to me, my daughter-in-law, had helped pick the place. That she'd been the one to find the rental company, handle the reservation, choose the specific cabin. He said it like it was a sweet thing, a generous thing, the two of them working together to do something nice for me. What I didn't know was that she'd been working on something else entirely. I found out 3 weeks before the trip, not because I'm clever, not because I suspected anything. I found out because of a printer. I'd driven over to my son's house that Tuesday afternoon to drop off a ceramic pot his wife had left at my place after a Sunday dinner. Nobody was home. He'd given me a key years ago for emergencies, so I let myself in, set the pot on the kitchen counter, and was heading back out when I noticed the printer light blinking in his home office. He'd mentioned it was acting up, paper jams, connectivity issues, and since I used to do facilities management for 22 years before I retired, I know my way around office equipment better than most. I went in to check it. There was a page stuck halfway through the feed tray. I pulled it free carefully so it wouldn't tear. I almost put it face down on the desk without reading it. I don't know what made me look. Maybe the word policy caught my eye. Maybe just the instinct of a man who spent 2 decades managing buildings and paperwork and the small details that other people overlook. It was a printout of an email, and the email was from my daughter-in-law to someone I didn't recognize. A name I'd never heard. No last name, just a first name. And what looked like a private email address, nothing official. The subject line said, Final arrangements. I stood there in that small office with the afternoon light coming through the blinds, and I read every word. She was asking about timing. She was asking whether a fall on a hiking trail, something steep, something with loose rock, would be ruled accidental given my age. She mentioned my heart condition, which I manage fine with medication, but which she apparently knew about in detail. She said my son didn't know anything about this conversation. She said she needed it done before the 15th because of the policy renewal window. She was talking about my life insurance. I don't know how long I stood there. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me later when I thought about it. I felt something go very still inside me. Not numb, not calm exactly, but still, like the moment just before a storm when the air stops moving entirely. I put the page back on the printer tray exactly where I'd found it. I walked out of the house, locked the door behind me, got in my truck, and drove to the end of their street before I had to pull over. Then I sat there for a long time. The first thing I thought about was my son, whether he knew. The email had said he didn't, and I wanted desperately to believe that. My son, who called me every other day, who'd flown home from a work trip to sit with me in the hospital after my bypass 3 years ago, who still kept a photo of his mother on his desk facing the door, so it was the first thing he saw when he sat down. I could not fit the version of him I knew inside the same frame as what I'd just read. I chose to believe the email. Not blindly. I know people can deceive in both directions. But I chose to believe it because I needed to think clearly. And collapsing into suspicion of everyone I loved wasn't going to help me. The second thing I thought was, I need to be careful. I didn't go to the police that day. I know that sounds strange, but I'm 67 years old, and I've watched enough things go sideways to know that a half-read printout from someone else's printer, with no context, no corroboration, no name that could be traced, that wasn't going to get anyone arrested, that was going to get me labeled as a paranoid old man who'd misread something. And it was going to warn her that I knew, and whatever advantage I had in knowing would evaporate immediately. So instead, I drove home. I made myself a cup of coffee. I sat at my kitchen table until it got dark, and then I made some calls. The first call was to a man named Howard, who'd been my college roommate for 3 years and had spent the last 30 as a licensed private investigator out of Knoxville. I hadn't spoken to him in 8 months. He answered on the second ring. I told him everything. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Send me everything you can document. Don't touch anything else at their house." He also told me something I hadn't considered. Don't cancel the trip. I asked him why. Because if you cancel, he said, she knows something changed. She adjusts. You lose the one thing you have. She doesn't know you know. We need that window. He was right. I hated that he was right, but he was right. Over the next 2 weeks, Howard worked quietly. He found the name from the email, a man with a history that included 2 prior fraud investigations, 1 assault charge that was ultimately dropped, and a current sideline off the books, doing what Howard carefully described as work that people don't want connected to themselves. He had no legitimate guiding credentials. He was not registered with any outfitter in Tennessee. But here was the piece that told the whole story. He had been in contact with my daughter-in-law's personal cell phone 7 times in the past month. Howard had the records. The second thing Howard did was make arrangements. He had a contact at the Sevier County Sheriff's Office. He had a former colleague who still worked field operations and who, for reasons that made complete sense to me once Howard explained them, was willing to come along on the trip as my friend from college, a man I'll call my hiking companion. We'd grown up in the same town, in this version of the story. We kept in touch for decades. My son and daughter-in-law had met him exactly once, at a cookout 2 summers ago. He was unremarkable in person, in the way that's actually a professional skill. I also, with Howard's guidance, had a small audio recorder running in my chest pocket for every conversation I had with my daughter-in-law during those 2 weeks. The way she asked me if I'd picked up the right hiking boots, the way she mentioned the trail near the cabin. Supposed to be beautiful, there's a lookout about 3 miles up, you'd love it, Dad. The way she said Dad, and held my eyes for just a half-second longer than necessary, like she was checking something. I smiled and said it sounded wonderful. I want to be honest about what those 2 weeks felt like. People sometimes assume that if you know you're in danger, the fear goes away because you have a plan. That's not how it works. I still woke up at 2 in the morning, some nights, staring at the ceiling. I still had moments in the grocery store, or sitting at a traffic light when it would hit me again. My son's wife wanted me dead. Wanted me dead for a life insurance policy. Had sat across from me at holiday dinners and birthday celebrations, and had looked me in the eye and called me Dad, and had been planning this. The grief of that sat right next to the fear. And some nights they were indistinguishable from each other. But I packed my bag. I loaded the truck. And on the Thursday morning in early October, I drove toward the mountains. The cabin was genuinely beautiful. I'll give her that much. It sat above a creek wrapped in hardwoods that had just started to turn, and the back deck looked out over a ridge that glowed orange and red in the late afternoon light. Under any other circumstances, I would have loved it. I stood on that deck the first evening and thought about how strange it is that a place can be both a gift and a trap at the same time. My hiking companion was staying at a different rental 2 miles down the road. We'd driven up separately. We had a system for communication that didn't involve my phone. Her people might be monitoring it, Howard had said, and I didn't want to take the chance. The outfitter my daughter-in-law had booked for me sent a confirmation the morning I arrived. 1 guide, full day. The high trail starting at 7 a.m. the following day. I confirmed. I went to bed. I didn't sleep much. The guide arrived at 6:55, which told me something about him before he said a word. A professional is 5 minutes early because it shows respect. A man running a job is 5 minutes early because he wants to move. He was friendly enough, good handshake, the right gear, knew the trail name and the access point and the weather window. Nothing obviously wrong. But there was something in the way his eyes tracked the parking area when he pulled up, like he was checking whether I'd brought anyone, that settled something in my chest. My hiking companion was already on the trail ahead of us, had been since 6 a.m. He knew every checkpoint. We started out. The first 2 miles were easy enough. He talked about the park, the elevation, the history of the area. He was good at the performance of it. I ask questions and let him talk because people who are performing appreciate an audience. And an audience that seems relaxed and a little slow, and maybe a bit winded from the altitude, is exactly what I needed him to see. Around the 2-mile mark, the trail narrowed. The ridge came into view above us, and to the left the ground dropped away sharply. Loose shale, exposed roots, a long fall if you went off the edge wrong. He slowed down, started talking less. I've thought about this moment many times since. The specific quality of the quiet that came over him. The way he moved just slightly behind me instead of alongside me. I stopped and turned to face him. "I need to tell you something," I said, "before we go any further." He looked at me. He didn't say anything. "I know why you're here," I said, "and I want you to understand that this conversation is being recorded, and there are 2 law enforcement officers within 300 yards of where we're standing right now." The change in his face was something I won't forget. Not guilt, exactly, more like a calculation that had just collapsed. The look of a man whose variables have all changed at once. "I don't know what you're." "You've been in contact with my daughter-in-law 14 times, I said. Howard had updated the count. "You have no guiding credentials. And the trail you've been angling toward since the first mile has a 40-foot drop on the loose shale side." He looked at the tree line. I watched him do it. "There's nothing there," I said quietly. "I promise you." My hiking companion stepped out from behind an outcropping, about 50 yards up the trail. He had his jacket open in a way that was not accidental. What happened next was not dramatic in the way you might imagine. There was no chase, no confrontation, no raised voices. The man sat down on a boulder beside the trail. He put his hands on his knees. He looked, suddenly, very tired. "She told me he was abusive," he said finally. "She told me the insurance money was going to her husband because you are going to take it away from him. She made it sound like—" He stopped, pressed his mouth together. "I know how that sounds." "It sounds like you made a decision," I said. Howard's contact arrived from the lower trailhead 15 minutes later. The man went without resistance. I stood on that bridge for a while after they left. My hiking companion stayed with me. We didn't talk much. The valley below was lit up red and gold, and the creek caught the light in small pieces to the trees, and it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen in my life, which felt both wrong and completely right at the same time. I called my son that evening. I told him I needed him to come to the cabin. I told him it was important and that he should come alone. He asked me twice if I was okay, and I told him the truth. I was safe, and there were some things he needed to know. He drove up that night. Got there around 9. I had coffee made and the lights on, and I sat him down at the kitchen table and I told him everything. All of it. From the printer page to Howard to the trail that morning. I watched his face while I talked. I've been a father for 34 years. I know my son's face the way I know my own handwriting. What I saw move across it while I talked was not guilt, and it was not the careful blankness of someone managing a discovered lie. What I saw was shock, and then horror, and then something that broke open. A kind of grief that I recognized because I'd been carrying the same thing for 2 weeks. He didn't speak for a long time after I finished. Then he said she kept asking me about the policy, the renewal date. I thought she was just being. He stopped. Swallowed. I thought she was being responsible. She had been arrested at their home that afternoon. Howard had coordinated the timing. The man from the trail had already given a full statement. My son put his head in his hands and I let him sit there. There's nothing to say in that moment. Nothing that helps. You just have to let it move through a person. After a while he looked up. "I'm sorry, Dad." I told him he had nothing to be sorry for. I told him that, and I meant it completely. What followed was the part no one tells you about, the part that comes after the dramatic moment, after the arrest, after the truth has finished arriving. The paperwork, the attorneys, the conversations with the DA's office. Howard's documentation proved crucial. The recorded conversations, the phone records, the statement from the man on the trail who, facing serious charges himself, had no reason left to protect anyone. She was charged with solicitation of murder and conspiracy. Her attorney argued the communications were misinterpreted, that nothing had actually happened. that the man on the trail was an unreliable witness with his own interests. The DA was patient and thorough. The jury was gone for less than 4 hours. She received 22 years. I've thought a lot about what she must have told herself, about the story you have to build in your head to justify something like this, the grievances you inflate, the resentments you tend to carefully over years, the way you must have to stop seeing the person on the other side of the plan as a person at all. I don't know what her version of me looked like in her mind. I don't know if I would recognize myself in it. My son filed for divorce before the trial. It was not a difficult decision for him by then, though it was a painful one. He moved into a smaller place closer to my house. We have dinner together most Sundays now. He started therapy in November, which took courage, and I've told him so. In the spring, I updated my will. I spoke with my estate attorney, a straightforward revision, nothing dramatic. I made clear allocations to my son, to 2 nephews I'm fond of, and to a scholarship fund at the university where I studied engineering, for students who need financial support in their second year and don't always qualify for the larger grants. My attorney raised an eyebrow at 1 or 2 of the decisions. I told him I'd done a lot of thinking over the winter. He said it showed. I went back to Gatlinburg in April, just for a weekend, by myself. Stayed at a different cabin, one I chose. Hiked the same ridge, though from a different access point, and made it all the way to the lookout my daughter-in-law had mentioned. She'd been right about one thing: it was beautiful up there. The kind of view that makes you feel very small and very lucky at the same time. I stood at that lookout for almost an hour. I thought about my wife, who died 4 years ago, and who would have had something sharp and funny to say about all this, and who I missed so much in that moment. It felt almost like a physical weight. I thought about my son, who was learning to trust his own judgment again, slowly, the way you learn anything important, with setbacks and patience and the occasional surprise. I thought about the fact that I almost didn't look at that printer page, that I almost put it face down on the desk and walked out and driven home and gone on the trip exactly as planned, without a hiking companion, without Howard, without any of it. The Smokies in April are a different thing than the Smokies in October. Green instead of gold, wetter, the air thick with something that smells like the ground coming back to life. I stood there in the middle of all that green and I breathed in, and I thought, I am still here. Not the absence of what happened, not the erasure of it, just the plain fact of still being here, with the valley spread out below me and the sky enormous overhead, and a long drive home ahead of me and a Sunday dinner to look forward to, and my son's voice on the phone later that evening asking if the hike was good. It was good, I would tell him. It was really, genuinely good. I keep coming back to the printer. That one moment, me standing in my son's office, afternoon light through the blinds, a jammed page in my hand that I almost didn't turn over. I think about all the ways that day could have gone differently. If I'd been in a hurry, if I'd just set it face down on the desk like a polite guest, if I hadn't spent 22 years in a job that trained me to pay attention to small things that other people walk past. There's a version of that trip where I don't come home. What I've learned, not from a book, not from anyone's advice, but from standing on that ridge in the Smokies with the valley spread out below me, is that the choices that save your life usually don't feel dramatic when you make them. They feel small. They feel like turning over a piece of paper, like making a phone call instead of going straight to the police, like trusting a man you haven't spoken to in 8 months because you know his character goes back 40 years. My daughter-in-law made choices too. She chose to see me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be reckoned with. And I think that's where things went wrong for her. Not in the planning, not in the details, but in that foundational miscalculation. She thought she understood what she was dealing with. She didn't. She saw a 67-year-old widower with a heart condition and a kind word for everyone, and she decided that was the whole picture. It wasn't. I don't say that with pride. I say it because I think it matters. What you assume about the people around you shapes every decision that follows. When you stop actually seeing someone, when they become just an obstacle or a means to an end, you start making mistakes. She made a lot of them. Howard always said, the best thing you can have in a crisis is a clear head and time, not luck. not strength. Just clarity and enough time to use it. I had 2 weeks. I used them. That's not heroism. That's just refusing to panic when panic is exactly what the situation is trying to produce in you. My son is doing better. Not the same. I don't think he'll ever be quite the same, and I've stopped expecting that, but better. He thinks more carefully now. He asks harder questions. He told me recently that he's grateful, in a way he can't fully explain, that it happened the way it did rather than some other way. I understood exactly what he meant. What I want people to take from this, if anything, is not that you should be suspicious of the people who love you. It's almost the opposite. Pay attention to them. Really pay attention. Not to catch them in something, but because genuine attention is the thing that makes betrayal hard to hide and trust, possible to build. My daughter-in-law operated in the space created by everyone's inattention. She counted on it. The moment I actually really looked, at what was in front of me, the whole thing started to unravel. I'm still here, still gardening until my knees complain, still having Sunday dinners with my son, still turning things over when something doesn't feel right.